without further ado, Lil Room is here to introduce himself before we have a little bit of a discussion and podcast. So why don't you introduce everybody? And if you want to say your name, I think that would just be hilarious because that is such an intense looking name as an native English speaker.
Okay. So by the way, the name on the Discord, the Aloysius Pesichek, is not my real name.
Say that 10 times fast.
Aloysius Pesichek, Aloysius Pesichek, Aloysius Pesichek. I don't know. I basically picked the most random Discord name. So anyway, my name is Lil Room. I'm a high school student, and I believe that the Minarchist state is the best way to do libertarianism for most countries, and I believe for almost every country. So my model of Minarchism is that one that where the state only provides necessary stuff such as army, court system, emergency service, and police to enforce the law, and the NAP, because I believe that the best combination for most stuff is the combination of NAP and the Roman law, which most European countries' law system is based on. And actually the Romans had pretty complex law for owners, and they have pretty complex property rights. So I believe it pairs nicely with NAP.
All right, fair enough. So tell us a little bit about like your channel and like what you're trying to establish with this conversation.
Okay, so the reason why I came here is because a lot of anarcho-capitalists that I encountered didn't want to have discussion with me because they basically said that I'm just a statist scum. So I was trying to find somebody that could have a conversation with me, trying to debate with me a little bit, trying to explain why I think my solutions are right, and for example, you to explain why you think your solutions are good and stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. You may be statist scum, which you obviously are, but at least you're not Marxist statist scum, right? You know what I mean? Like we need to make the distinction, boys. These are our allies. You know, I think the interesting thing about at least me, and I believe Mark would agree too. You know, we chose the name Fabian Liberty as a kind of a cheeky steal from the Fabian Society in England. We believe in incrementalism. We believe in agorism and dual power theory and things of that nature to undermine the state in certain ways. But we don't believe in, you know, wanton violence. We don't believe that like some violent revolution is going to change things. And we believe that we can, hopefully, we believe that there is a road to success in bringing libertarian ideals and ideology into both the Republican and Democratic Party, growing the Libertarian Party, and reducing the size, scope, and purview of the state. And we believe that as that occurs, people will see the successes of those policies, as well as, you know, changing the education system, changing the culture a little bit, changing the philosophy, hopefully, and achieve minarchism on our way, which, you know, I think the idea for us is that, you know, we want to go a step further than you would, right? You know, I think that our goal right now is the exact same direction and the exact same goal. The only difference is once we reach kind of your end point on the goal, we would want to continue further. But you know, as we've said on this channel multiple times, and it's a favorite of Mark's, you know, good men plant seeds for trees of which the shade they will never sit in, right? And so I don't think this is a thing that happens tomorrow. I think this is a long and arduous fight and journey that we're going to have, and likely you and I will be advocating for nearly the exact same thing throughout our entire lives. Hopefully not our entire lives, but likely our entire lives. And I leave that fight, you know, for anarchism and whatnot, you know, to the next generation or the generation after that.
Okay. So my first question is that why do you think that basically the decentralized state is not the way? Because you said the things that you advocate for, but you did not say why you don't think the minarchism is not the way. So I would be interested in that, because I think that, for example, I'm quite skeptical about the polycentric law. I'm not saying that the system itself is garbage or anything. I'm just very skeptical because there could be so many versions of the law, and I don't know how consistent it could be.
Yeah, I mean, so what I advocate for is anarchism, right? So I would advocate even deeper than what you're afraid of, which is that I would advocate that anarcho-communist communes exist. I would argue that anarcho-socialist places exist. I would argue that covenant communities that differ in their laws exist. I don't see that. I mean, when you say, well, there will be so many different things, it's like the question that you're asking is one of scale, not one of what is already exists, right? Because America obviously has a very different legal system than Canada or Mexico, or right? But that doesn't mean that there's this mass confusion because Americans live in America. Well, under my system, people would live in a covenant community, and they would understand that the neighboring town may have different rules and different standards. Yeah. So I fail to see the issue there at all.
Okay, I was more, for example, talking about how would you achieve that the law system under the polycentric law would bring the more justice than, for example, something with more centralized law. That's my biggest concern. I'm not that much of a concern about like the things that a lot of people storm about, and what if we privatize the post office or some shit like that. No, the most thing that concerns me is the law enforcement.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that states have already proven themselves wholly inadequate in their ability to pursue justice and equal rights and equal protection under the law anyways, right? So I would say your question is, well, will it be worse, right? Because we already know that the state is an apparatus that protects its own interests, those of its oligarchical kind of friends, if you will. And so the question is, would my system be better at that? And I think a system that has far less power in that regard, under minarchism, would be better than what we currently have. I would agree with you on that. But I think that you need to follow that through further. I think every man should be, every man, woman, and woman, we'll say, but every man should be able to voluntarily associate under whatever legal system it is that they themselves prefer, so long as they're not violating or aggressing upon other people. And I don't trust a state to be the ultimate arbiter of that over other people. It's shown itself to be incapable of doing such over and over again.
Okay, so my other question is that, for example, let's say that some shit went down. For example, I own a piece of land and you own a piece of land. I, for example, decide to poop on your piece of land, and you want to take it to the court. And I say, I don't want this type court with this justice system, and you say you don't want this court with this justice system. What are we gonna do then?
So there are a lot of proposed solutions. Number one, I think we live in an overly tortuous society. So, I would say the likelihood is that these things could obviously be, pooping on someone else's land is likely something that hopefully a society that lives this way would not feel the need to bring that to arbitration, right?
Nah.
You know what I mean? But let's say this guy is dead set on arbitration, right? So what you're really talking about is negative externalities, right?
Yes.
You have person A and person B don't have a contract together, and yet something that person A does via a voluntary contract with another person, or just because they're a shitty person, negatively impacts you as an individual, right? Now, I don't want to get into like water rights and like what we might consider like Hoppian perspectives on like common property and stuff. I'll stick with your example, right? Which is where someone directly damages your property. Now, ultimately, everything is an escalation, right? Like that's kind of the basic presupposition of the non-aggression principle, right? Is reasonable escalation, right? So when you're dealing with a property owner damaging your property, you know, what you want is you want to follow the non-aggression principle, right? So everything needs to be a reasonable level of kind of escalation. So I can't just go, oh, you pooped on my land, now I'm going to shoot you and kill your children, right? Well, I guess that would be, you know, like, that's not reasonable. Other people are harmed. It's an extreme overreaction. So instead,
Yes.
you both have rights enforcement agencies, and you file a claim against this person's against this person's REA, just like you would in a car accident, right? You know, someone has a fender bender with you. What do? Well, you don't actually handle it mano a mano in the street. Hopefully, you know, this does happen, but for the most part, what you do is you say, give me your insurance card. You know, they have Geico, I have Nationwide, and then Geico and Nationwide handle this shit. Right. So I think a majority of these instances will be handled between two agencies working together, or at the very least, an agency working on your behalf. Now, you said, but in this example, this person doesn't recognize the legitimacy of your agency. Right. The thing is that in order for anarcho-capitalism or any form of anarchism to exist, you have to have a certain critical mass of individuals that believe in the system of your covenant community or whatever it may be, right? So in this example, this person is likely living in a covenant community. I think those will be more likely than the kind of free range anarcho-capitalism we see. And under a covenant community, you very likely live under a minarchist system, right? That you voluntarily chose to invest in. I mean, look at Prospera, for example. Right. Situations like that where individuals signed a contract with the entire neighborhood that they have, and they agree via that contract to to live under certain rules and guidelines, etc. So again, we're talking about a limit case, because what we have to now assume is that nobody in this situation lives in a covenant community where they have signed contracts to recognize the legitimacy of rights enforcement agencies. Right. So now we live on the outskirts. We don't live in a covenant community. Now we're talking about one person violating another person's private property rights, and the person refuses to accept the legitimacy of the rights enforcement agencies, and instead says, fuck you, I'm going to keep shitting on your property because fuck you. Now at this point, the reasonable escalation is to do something as a means of forcibly removing them from your property. Right? They're coming onto your property to damage your property. So now it is perfectly reasonable to you forcibly remove that person. I think the example you're giving, I think, is one of where we attempt to imagine that this kind of Nietzschean perspective that, holy shit, thanks for the sub bomb, Roland. I really appreciate it. I do. Where this imagined perspective that anarchism is like this lawless, ruleless place. And I don't think that is likely to occur in a society and a culture that has adopted anarchism, right? Like it's kind of, I know it's kind of a bullshit argument, and it's kind of like a, trust me, it'll be fine, you know, and I don't want to be like the communists that are like, you know, oh, it'll work out once everyone's, you know, educated on class consciousness. But I do think there's some element of an argument here that these people growing up in an anarchist society will have to learn conflict resolution in matters like this without necessarily the state. And if they're refusing all of the other traditionally, or I should say conventionally accepted forms of conflict resolution, then you're dealing with a violent person that needs to be removed from your property. You're not dealing with a normal person. You're dealing with a criminal.
Okay. So my biggest concern with anarcho-capitalism and other forms of anarchism in that way is that it kind of...
Someone says, fertilizer. The real answer to your question was thanking them for fertilizing your fields.
Okay, so now answer the other question. My problem with anarchist societies in general is that it's kind of based, in my opinion, on like moral evolution to the next step, where, for example, people, I heard some anarcho-capitalists say that people will have to learn that stealing is wrong even when the government does it. But how are they going to learn that? So my concern about that is that I don't believe that we can get to that moral evolution. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if it's like possible in...
Yeah, I think the road towards anarchism, and also the road towards minarchism here, is education first. And I don't necessarily mean education like the stream we're doing right now, right? I mean education in the sense that you have to start with
think tanks and such.
No, not even that. I mean with children. So I think the thing that, you know, libertarians, minarchists, AnCaps, you know, we get really big into the theory. And I think what's more important is a basic philosophical education for people in our society and a basic understanding of creating a society of people that are free thinkers and think for themselves and think in terms of individual liberty. And until we can destroy the state's stranglehold over the education system, we'll never achieve that.
I agree that the state should not be like involved in education and such. But I also believe that, for example, and I don't want to sound like a dictator, that when the state enforces the law, sometimes it can be more effective. For example, or it can be sometimes even like more, I don't know. It just seems to me that if, for example, there is a threat that the police gonna get you, they will get you, and they will get you under every circumstance.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody is advocating for a society without policing.
Sure, but for example, what if somebody cannot pay the private agency? For example, cannot afford to pay private agency. And I know this sounds like a straw man, but I want to know, what if somebody wanted to report a robbery, let's say, and they wanted to hire and police, let's say a private police, just for the sake of argument, but they didn't have the money for the service, and let's say there would not be any service to investigate it, or because simply there would be no service on the market in order to like do this.
Right. So two things. Number one, let's talk about rights enforcement agencies for individuals that don't have a REA, right? So as it stands right now, one of the biggest problems in our criminal justice system here in America, at least, is that the more capital you have, the better representation you're able to hire. And this makes the judicial process somewhat unfair. We should, to say the very least, right? Now, if you are poor and you're making a certain low amount of money, right? Like you're under a certain threshold, there are tons of both state-run and charity organizations where lawyers work pro bono helping people through these scenarios. I don't imagine a world where rights enforcement agencies exists and people don't do this, right? Like it's so. I mean, there's that scenario. Number two, you're talking about multiple layers of failure here. Failure of the individual to have a rights enforcement agency, the failure of the individual to, let's say, knowingly like rent on a place or own property somewhere, and there not be some form of policing in the area that is kind of agreed upon by everyone that lives in the area. You know, so you're talking about multiple points of failure. And then in this instance, wouldn't the criminal justice system be unfair because they wouldn't have help? Yeah, but we live under that today, right? Like this isn't a perfect solution, but I mean, I can tell you more than once as a child, I remember living with my father, and I lived in a very ghetto neighborhood. I was like the token white kid in the neighborhood. People stole my bike multiple times, and my father actually had eventually at one point bought a Savannah monitor, which is the second largest lizard in the world, just under a Komodo dragon, and put it in the basement. And that was how we solved my bike getting stolen from our house getting broken into. Why? Because the police didn't do anything about my bike being stolen because they didn't give a fuck, because I was in a poor neighborhood. More than once, I lived in this poor neighborhood, and we heard gunshots, and we would call the police, and the police wouldn't show up until the next day in the morning because they're like, yeah, this is a bad neighborhood. We don't come here at night. Right. So the failures that you're describing, you're taking limit cases of multiple levels of failure and then saying, isn't this a hole in your system? Yeah. No, nobody's arguing that anarcho-capitalism is perfect. And I don't think anyone's arguing that minarchism is perfect. I think the only people that argue for perfection are the communists that say, well, once everyone lives in the utopia, everything will work out great. I think the communists are the only ones selling a utopia here. What we're saying is, we have certain ethical and moral principles, and we hold anarcho-capitalism because we believe in these principles to their extreme limit. They are deontological principles. We believe in the sovereignty of the individual. Any theft, or you see what I'm saying? Sorry, I know I'm droning on.
Yeah, I know what you're trying to say, but I have like a certain feeling that you are talking about those communities where you voluntarily come, you pay, for example, the community to you pay to live in the you pay, let's say, the rent, right? And the community provider gives you the defense, the inside security, let's say a police, and somebody to like be a judge when shit goes down. So my question is, isn't it kind of sort of like a voluntary state, basically? Isn't that basically?
Well, it's a voluntary government. It's not a voluntary state, right? Because the state is illegitimate, both in its monopoly on power and violence that is forced upon people, right? So when a voluntary state is a paradox, you can't have a voluntary state. You can have a voluntary form of self-governance, right? You can have a voluntary, people could choose to live in voluntary societies, but so long as freedom of movement and freedom of association are respected, right? It's not, and you're not imposing, anti-discrimination. Well, actually, you could do that so long as it was voluntary when you set that up. So long as it is voluntarily occurring and people can divest from this system whenever it is that they choose, right? They can sell their property and move somewhere else. There's not really an issue here with people voluntarily creating a minarchist covenant community. There's no issue there. The issue is when you want something like, let's say, the United States of America as an example, and you want it to become a minarchist society, and I have no choice but to live under the tutelage and the patronage of the American state. And I never signed a contract with America. I never signed the Declaration of Independence. I never agreed to these rules. I never agreed to this enforcement. And instead, a democratic process is used to steal from me or to enforce certain rules and legislation upon me, to enforce certain laws upon me. All of this is a state apparatus. And so there's a very big difference between making a nation state minarchist and a voluntary covenant community that chooses to organize itself in a minarchist fashion, or even, let's say, a heterarchical structure like Chiron, Mexico, right? Like I have no problem with them in, in an anarchist society. I wouldn't want to live there, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't exist or that they're illegitimate, so long as they're voluntary and they're not violating people's natural law rights.
Okay. So, I don't know. That was actually a very good explanation. But let's just say that, for example, some community would, let's just say, they would decide to build an army, right? I would like to give those examples. And let's just say that they would buy the all other communities that they would for exchange for protection and such.
I actually have a whole video on how can anarchism defend itself, where I talk about community policing and things like that. So the danger here is, does this become a nation state that then invades other covenant communities and take them over?
And there was things that I was trying to get into. Let's just say that they will buy a whole other communities, and over time they will become more strict, and they will, for example, get you into prison if you basically decide not to pay the rent. They will over time become a tax. Isn't that like a weaker side of the anarcho-capitalism? And I'm not here to like shit on anarcho-capitalism today. I'm just trying to I was just trying to ask my concerns and what I think are just like weak points.
Yeah, I mean, I can get into it a little bit, but like I said, I have a whole video on my YouTube for it.
Okay.
But long story short, TLDR, right? In order for a state to start taking over other covenant communities, right? So they become a state de facto, right? They have to now take over other places to gain power, to gain commodity and resources. In doing that, there's nothing wrong with them buying those places. But again, it becomes a state as opposed to a voluntary government the moment people are not able to divest from that, right? The moment people can't say, cool, I'm selling my property, you can fuck off, and they dip out, right? So, but let's say that happens mostly through voluntary means the most time until they get like, let's say as big as the size of Florida, and everywhere else there's these little city states. And now you have this nation state basically. Well, it's no different than nation states that already exist, threatening anarchist communities as we see them, right? So I talk in the video about the Republic of Cospaya from 1440 to 1826. I talk about Chiron, Mexico. But basically the idea is economic entanglement is key here, right? So you do need your own defense force. You do need something. You do need contracts with mercenary companies likely. You need the will to protect yourself. But like I said, I don't want to get too into the weeds on it because, like I said, I've kind of already answered the question via video. Maybe you should check it out. Maybe, I don't know. But like, yeah, economic entanglement is a big thing. Being economically independent and then selling things to other people. But the real answer here is, you know, as soon as they start aggressing upon people and taking over places through violence, you know, it's our duty to fight them. It's our duty to band together. It's our duty to hire mercenary companies. You know, it's the duty of insurance companies to ensure that, you know, covenant communities that are nearby or even anarchist communes and things that are nearby this nation state have adequate protection. There's a lot of things here, but I think the Republic of Cospaya and Chiron have both proven that myth wrong, that anarchist communities cannot defend themselves from larger, more powerful nation states.
Okay. My other question is that I was teasing it before in the conversation. If you had to choose a state, let's just say that anarchist society is not viable. If you had to choose a state, what would it be? The Hoppian solution that the absolutist monarchy is better because the monarch basically acts like a capitalist, so he doesn't raise taxes so much. Or my solution that is democratic, but the state's agenda is severely limited only to provide the emergency services, courts, and police.
Yeah, I think you just slandered Hoppa's views pretty heavily in Democracy, the God That. So I kind of just dismissed with the question because that's not what Hoppa argues in any way, shape, or form.
No, but he said that the monarchy is better, right?
He said that medieval monarchies, historical monarchies, before the Industrial Revolution and before communism existed, really.
Yes.
Were better. Obviously, they were better.
I said the absolutist monarchy, which is basically the medieval model. But even in
but we have absolute monarchies today that don't resemble those at all. Cuba is a great example. North Korea is a great example. These are absolute monarchies. But given the Industrial Revolution, given ideological changes in history due to communism, right, and the way that we've advanced as a society, absolute monarchies have turned into something that they. So yeah, so like obviously I wouldn't want to live under an absolute monarchy. Especially because, and also this is widely shown by Hoppa in Democracy, the God That Failed. The judicial system was an extreme issue because of the absolute monarchy. Whereas he argues that judicial systems under liberal democracies might be the only thing that was actually better.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I would choose to live under a system like, you know, Wellspring is a friend of the channel. He's an objectivist. It's writing a libertarian constitution that he wants to try and foist upon the African world. Liberland is another great example. I would love to live under Liberland.
Actually, when I was just a little like that, the Vidya Lichka is from the same country as I am. So that's kind of bug moment right there.
Yeah, no, I think I've looked at Liberland's constitution pretty heavily. One of the things that I like that we had a bit of a debate on this channel was
voluntary taxation.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's not anarchism. It's not what I want, right? But if given a choice between America, given a choice between, let's say, a thriving Liberland that kind of has its shit figured out, I would choose to live under Liberland. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of having judicial review before laws pass, and then them going back to the public, so that not only do your representatives have to pass legislation, they have to go through judicial review, and they have to go through the executive, and they have to be popular vote won before any new law can come into effect. I think that's pretty based, because I think it is one way to limit the growth of the state. Though I think history shows us that any minarchist state eventually becomes an authoritarian state.
Yes.
Which is one of my big issues with minarchism, is that it's
yes.
all fine and dandy, and then 100 years later, it's fucking America. America was a minarchist state.
Yeah, I know. So other thing that I wanted to talk about libertarian concepts for my country is a concept of libertarian democracy, which basically is based on a constitution that basically disapproves state-owned businesses because they are not based on market competition. It basically restricts the state to only be like a service, for example, like I said with the police. And the whole system is only based on like a limiting government, that the whole constitution is basically based on like NAP. Basically, the constitution is NAP. Do you think that this system could become viable in some shape or form? I cannot send you the...
You don't have to send me anything. Just for everyone watching, this is Lil Room's YouTube channel again, if you want to go follow him.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't need to be sending anything. I think that obviously I think that's viable. I don't think that it's what I want, and I don't think it's the most moral decision possible. But it's, you know, I had a dietitian friend in the Army, and she had this really good phrase that she liked to use, right? Which is kind of a redoing of you know, perfect is the enemy of the good, which is you know, good, better, best. She stressed good, better, best in your dietary choices. Right?
Okay.
There are bad dietary choices. There are good dietary choices. There are better choices, and then there's the best choice. And under my kind of ideological framework, anarchism, and specifically anarcho-capitalism, voluntarism, is the best choice. The better choice is constitutional minarchism. The better choice is a system like America versus, you know, the rest of the world. And a good choice is a liberal democracy versus, let's say, a totalitarian regime or something like that, right? So, like, is it viable? Well, America's viable. It's not, but I don't think it's good morally. Like, you know, I consider it to be an evil, but it's certainly better than others.
Okay, so for example, let's just say, when we like talk about the countries anyway, what country right in the world that is internationally recognized, because the Liberland is not internationally recognized, only national entity.
Well, also Liberland is doesn't really have a population or anything.
It's actually a big meme in Czechia.
Yeah.
But actually, I think they had some interesting ideas. But my question is, when there is no anarcho-capitalism, what country in the world is closest to your views, and why? Because, for example,
I'd have to say America probably, but
why not Singapore?
Singapore has a lot of libertarian stuff, but it also has a lot of like really authoritarian state stuff at the same time, right? Like the way that they force neighborhood collectivization together. You know, there's the way that they like force certain ethnic demographics to be present within apartment buildings and shit. Like Singapore does some interesting shit, and I do think it's something to watch to see how it plays out. But I don't know that Singapore has the history, the longevity, and the stability to really necessarily say like Singapore is my go-to place. I would say Hong Kong, 1990, pre-1997, and even up until 5 years ago, probably I would say is another good example, right? But again, Hong Kong is now, being overtaken by Beijing. So,
okay.
You see what I'm saying? So like, I mean, America has a certain stability to it and a certain history, that I think gives it something, but I think it was better in the past in some ways and worse in the past.
Okay. I don't actually really care about America because I never even been to America, so I cannot really comment on that.
Have you been to Singapore?
Nah, but I know.
I was just curious.
but if I actually had to compare the Singapore and the US, I would actually choose Singapore because I like the efficiency, and I like that there are much less regulation on like trade and stuff.
Yeah, no, like it definitely has some advantages. I'll give it that for sure. My issue with Singapore is that it also has some weird authoritarianism, and without it doesn't have the same kind of system of attempting to protect rights that America has, right? Like the Bill of Rights and the Supreme Court, while flawed and have been shown to be flawed and have been chipped away over time because of those, is a fairly strong system of protecting rights.
Okay. I have now I will probably go to talk about some strawmanning. Do you believe that actually most anarcho-capitalists support Pinochet regime? Because I've seen a lot of people saying that.
No, that's an internet meme, and I dismiss with it.
Okay, but
I mean, like,
actually,
I think some people, right, recognize the legitimate history, right, which is that, you know, both the legislator and the judicial begged for Pinochet to come in because they had an authoritarian dictator, and his initial actions were in some ways justified. What he did after that was horrendous war crimes against his own people, and he's an evil dictator.
Okay, I actually ask because there is a leftist magazine, and that shit is like anarcho-syndicalist Noam Chomsky type shit of magazine. It's called Alarm.
It's called what?
And they actually Alarm. A2L. Hold on.
Yeah, I have no idea.
They actually have an interview with Noam Chomsky. Anyway, they're basically saying that, for example, people such as myself or people such as you, that their ultimate goal is a Pinochetian style of state. And basically they are claiming that a lot of libertarians such as Friedrich August von Hayek were actually supporters of Pinochet. And because I, for example, somebody like such as myself, support Hayek's idea, for example, on currency.
Right.
They basically are preaching that most libertarians actually support the authoritarians. Where do you think this stuff comes from?
I mean, so I think libertarians online are made up of three people, right? Especially when you even more so when you're talking about extreme libertarians like minarchists and, you know, Mises Caucus LP people, you know, anarcho-capitalists, you know, etc. Right? Like when you get into the more fringe libertarian ideologies, right?
Okay.
I think you have three types of people. Number one, you have people that were conservatives that began to see the state as a negative thing, started to realize the inefficiencies of the state, and became more and more libertarian from that regard. These people are fine. But these people also aren't theory heads, and these people aren't very vocal online. Number two, you have people that came at it from the economics perspective. They started reading Hayek. They read, you know, they learned about, you know, basic economics. They found Austrian economics. They found that it was a superior form of being able to view things. They learned about the economic calculation problem. You know, they learned about marginal revolution in economics theory and things like that. And by going at it from the route of economics, these people tend to be, for lack of a better or less offensive word, autistic as fuck. Right? And their social skills suck. And they're terrible communicators of ideas. And you see this all the time. You see this with like people like, you know, a lot of the people in the Mises Institute in America, a lot of the thinkers, you know, they came at it from an economics perspective, and they're great at arguing economics. But then they also, you know, Walter Block is out here, you know, on my own stream talking about voluntary slavery and shit, right? Like these people are cringe as fuck because they have no capacity of communicating with normal fucking human beings, right?
Okay.
And then you have the third group. And the third group are individuals that have been fucked over and have always been weird and have always been outside of society in some way. And they had something bad or negative happen to them. And so what they did is they found extreme libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism as a means of separating themselves from the rest of culture and society. These people are also terrible fucking communicators. Now, I will add a fourth group. teenagers that want to be edgy.
Okay.
These are basically everybody within the libertarian movement, right? You have your constitutional conservatives that don't say much online, that became, paleo libs and then became libertarians in some regard. You have your economics type people. You have your I was fucked over and damaged and I've always been different from everybody else type people. And then you have edgy teenagers. Three of the four of these people engage in silly, crazy arguments online, don't understand people, or they want to post edgy memes. One out of the four of these people are normies that aren't terminally online and aren't necessarily vocal about their politics. And so that's the problem.
Okay. So I basically am the part of the the autistic part, because I actually have poor social skills and I actually have Asperger's.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that people such as myself, who basically that their argumentation is more based on economics rather than ethics, that they can be in at least some way beneficial to the movement of libertarianism, as long as they don't talk about voluntary slavery? Do you think that these people can be moderated by the rest of the community into being a valuable player?
I think everybody's valuable, super valuable. I just think that we have a really big PR problem within libertarianism. Right?
Yes.
And for the record, like my son's autistic, right? I understand, that like I'm not using it as an insult. I'm just using it as an honest assessment of a large portion of the libertarian community.
I did not mean it as an insult. I know actually libertarians who are autistics. It's actually pretty common if you think about it.
Yeah, and so I think the real thing here is understanding that failure leads us into these places where, edgy teenagers talk about Pinochet, right? Because they think it's funny and it makes a good meme. The regular libertarian conservatives don't say anything. The other and then the other two groups that I mentioned are willing to have a discussion about it. And in this day and age, willing to have it because they don't understand that they've just walked into a PR nightmare, because they're either autistic economists or they're fucking people that pride themselves by being outside of the Overton window of the rest of society. And what they don't realize is that even entertaining the question often leads to negative PR. And that's an unfortunate kind of thing. But I mean, again, when we're going back to the original portion of the question, I think it's funny when ANSENs and ANCOMs and shit label us with these crazy things. It's like, okay, why don't we take some ideas from the shit people you support have said? You know what I mean? Like, we just as easily could misalign them as being, fucking violent commies. And more often than not, we wouldn't be wrong.
Okay. Okay, so the other thing is, what are your thoughts on a Paleo Libertarian movement as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
Because
I agree. Yeah.
Because a lot of anarcho-capitalists, I was asking on a Czech anarcho-capitalist forum if they are more followers of like the bleeding heart libertarianism, that basically culturally lefty stuff, or more of a Paleo Libertarian, for example, let's say Mises, who was very conservative later in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not willing to give me an answer, because they said the whole question was bullshit. So I would like to ask you, where do you stand on that issue?
I think Paleo Libertarianism is a great movement, right? I think what we have to understand is, I think what you want, one of the failures of the libertarian movement is they're having a movement where almost everything that they do is, whether they are consequentialists or not, they are engaging in a consequentialist argumentation of public policy and governments with some random thrown in cringe deontological positions without explaining them. Okay. And what I mean by that is most of the libertarian movement is fighting a policy and government war, sometimes fighting a cultural war, very rarely engaging with the philosophical problems here. And I think Paleo Libertarianism is a great way to shift the libertarian movement into the culture war arena, which I think is a level of abstraction above kind of the politics. Because I don't think we're ever going to win this fight if we continue to try and argue and advocate for the, consequentialist outcomes of libertarian politics. And so I think Paleo Libertarianism is really good for that, for changing the culture, changing the way that conservatives view the issues that we have, and interjecting libertarian philosophy into the conservative space. Because I think the last big cultural shift in conservatism was William F. Buckley's neoconservatism. And I think what we're seeing now is that the conservatives are hungry and starving for a more legitimate movement within the conservative movement. And I think, you see figureheads like Bolsonaro and Trump and, Marine Le Pen and things like that. And what you're seeing this populism shift. And I think populism is really just the weeping symptom of a destroyed party trying to cling on to some common sense in a world gone mad. And I think paleoconservatism, is a movement that can bring conservatism back to maybe its ideological roots of classical liberalism, and that can only be a good thing for the libertarian freedom movement as a whole.
Okay, so do you consider yourself a paleo-libertarian? That was more of my question. Because the thing about paleo-libertarians that was there before, I think that there could not be any other type of libertarianism, because let's just say that a lot of the progressive stuff that you see is based on Marxist critical theory.
Yeah,
that was popular in like 1930s of Germany. And
I mean, well, I think what most people don't realize is that Marxist and Hegelian dialectics and critical theory from the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism has become the staple ethics in a lot of Western countries, and even the conservatives play into those ethical standards without realizing it. So I do understand your critique that left-leaning libertarianism is kind of doomed from the start, because from a philosophical position they're very Marxist in their thinking, and that while they might achieve some measure of success with libertarian policies, ultimately they will just be playing their hand to the radical left. And I say I agree. At the same time, I'm not going to begrudge people like, let's say, Spike Cohen in America, who's very leftist in his thinking, in his fight against, let's say, repealing some of the Supreme Court decisions that have made the police state so strong in America. You know what I mean? Like there are fights to pick, and then there are kind of things to let play out. Like, I don't necessarily think that I should be trying to stop Spike Cohen from getting rid of Pearson v. Ray and qualified immunity from policing, right? Because I agree with him on that. I just think ultimately he's doomed to fail. The left-wing libertarianism is doomed to fail and be consumed by socialist thinkers.
Okay, so the other question is that I've heard recently that in anarchist circles there is a thing that is, for some reason, I don't understand how it can be popular, the anarchist unity. Would you rather align with those people than, let's say, with myself? Because I believe that the anarchist unity is doomed to fail from the very start, because you have people such as anarcho-capitalists who say that ownership of property is invalid and illegitimate. Illegitimate. Yes. And then you have me who wants a tiny bit of government compared to the shit that we have right now.
Here's what I'll say about anarchist unity.
Yes.
Proudhon had an understudy, right? The father of anarchism. He had an understudy named Chaudet. You know about Chaudet?
Probably.
So Chaudet has no writings, really. He fought Bakunin in the Paris Commune, Paris Commune, and in the First International. He fought Bakunin when Bakunin wanted to collectivize property. So you had the Proudhonians and the Blanquists. And what happened? Well, the Blanquists paired up with the communists because they didn't like the fact that Sade and the torchbearer for anarchism believed in private property and private property rights. So they had him executed. And I'll give another example. Benjamin Tucker and Most in America. Benjamin Tucker, one of contemporary of Proudhon, and probably one of the fathers of the anarcho-individualist movement, was doing great things along with Josiah Warren, Lysander Spooner, Voltairine de Cleyre, or at least Voltairine de Cleyre in her early days, for the anarcho-individualist movement. And Hermost and the ANCOMs come over and they have unity, anarchist unity. And what do? They start bombing fucking cops and they turn the entire American government against anarchism. I think you look at this happened in the Second International where the communists took over. This happened in the Black International where the communists took over. I think when you align yourself with left-wing anarchists, you should do so very tepidly. And you should do so only for very specific goals. Because these people are not your friends. Because their ideas are laden with Marxist philosophy. And ultimately, I think they do more to help Marxism than they do to help anarchism.
Okay, that's actually a nice answer, because I was watching some debates between basically a Noam Chomsky clone here in Czechia, and a famous anarcho-capitalist here, Martin Urza, and the anarcho-syndicalist said that for anarcho-capitalists it is extremely dangerous to align with minarchists because the minarchists will fuck them over in the long run. Do you believe that it is true to 100%? That we basically will fuck you over if you align with us.
I'm sorry. Could you reword the question? I was a little bit distracted and it's hard to. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, recently I was watching a debate between anarcho-syndicalists and anarcho-capitalists. And the anarcho-syndicalists said that for anarcho-capitalists, it is extremely dangerous to align yourself with the minarchist movement, or let's say, non-anarchist libertarians, because non-anarchist libertarians will fuck you over in the long run. And I personally don't want to fuck you in the long run. Do you believe that it is true?
I think we're moving in the same. So I think there's a very distinct difference between anarchist unity and unity between ANCAPs, volunteerists, Georgians, anarcho-individualists, and libertarians. Here's the difference. Anarchists on the left hate capitalism more than they hate the state.
I know. And
so their solutions to problems often lead to an increase in state power in the name of harm reduction. They have no problem with increased regulation. They have no problem with the state taking over things like healthcare and things like that. So, when am I debating Destiny? CTV and Destiny have to debate each other first, and the winner of that is who I will debate. So I'm not guaranteed to debate Destiny. I could debate Critically Thinking Veteran. But yeah. But anyways, so I think the thing is that between someone like you and I, we would have very similar positions on what to do in the here and now, right? Like, I think, for example, when I flout the idea, hey, what can we do to help healthcare in this country, right? And I go to a left-wing anarchist and I say, for example, one of the things we should do immediately is we should make it so that any drug that is approved in Canada and the UK is automatically approved for sale and usage in America. For example, things like insulin, EpiPens, etc. All of these things are artificially incredibly expensive because for insulin, for example, the FDA only approves one company to manufacture and sell insulin, which is why insulin is so expensive in this country. And I say, like, hey, can we agree on that? And the left-wing anarchists say, no, what we need is government run. I won't agree to that. So they won't agree with me in anything, right? But if I go to a minarchist and I bring that solution, I think most minarchists would be like, yeah, that's a very sensible solution to, increase the availability of drugs in the market and reduce prices and make everybody happier and healthier. So like that's the real issue here, is that while you and I will eventually become enemies because I will eventually have to regard you as a statist, and I want the dissolution of the state, we are enemies way, way down the line. Because in the here and now, we agree on 98% of shit. Whereas the left-wing anarchists and I agree on almost nothing.
Okay. So actually, you are talking about the increasing government, but now I will want to talk for longer. The welfare state makes people poorer. Do you know why? Or do you want to know why?
I absolutely know why, and it's something I've argued for several times.
Okay, so actually, welfare state, at least here where I live, the people are actually taxed before their income is even before them. So actually, what happens here is that you have your income, it's taxed, it goes to, it's taxed, and then you buy shit with VATs. So in the long run, the poor people don't have the money, and then the state has to take care of them, and they don't really realize, self-realize in the down the line. So actually,
yeah, I mean, Thomas Sowell was pointing this shit out in the 70s.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And we ignored him, right? I mean, he was looking at the differences between,
yes,
segregated black communities that, started having their own entrepreneurship, started having, what he wouldn't have described at the time, but what anarchists would call, praxis. Sorry.
No, I was talking about the tax in the labor tax. That is actually, are there any anarchists that want to abolish that? On the left? Labor tax is basically that before your income even is taxed, that basically from every hour that you work, you will get taxed from that.
I would assume that there are plenty of left-wing anarchists that are against labor taxes.
That's good. So this brings me to another point.
Right, but they're also in favor of increased taxation in other areas. You know what I mean? Like,
yes,
which is essentially a labor tax.
Yes, and this brings me to another thing. What if, let's just say that our ideas are not compatible with most leftists, but I think that there is, and you mentioned it, and I mentioned it in the voice chat on the server.
Right.
The thing that I think could bring more leftists onto libertarians down the line, because we have to do the baby steps. So I think the actually very good things for, let's say, the anarchists is mutualism, because it recognizes the importance of market. But for the non-anarchist leftists, I think the Georgism is an excellent solution, because let's say what do average leftists, let's say in the US or for the matter in the Western Hemisphere want? They want rich to pay taxes, and basically a lot of people who own the land are rich, and basically it ensures the market efficiency while also not screwing everybody. So
yeah, we've had this discussion before.
Yes,
I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. I think Georgism is a terrible idea, and I think it's also a bad idea for trying to get. I don't think you're going to win any leftists with Georgia.
I actually sort of did.
I mean, sure, you might find the end. Okay, let me rephrase so that my statement is not so that my statement is actually logical. I don't think it's a good movement to move any significant amount of left-wing people into the libertarian space. Okay. Sure, you might get onesies and twosies, but some people are just dumb. You can convince them of anything.
Okay, so what would you propose? How to educate, for example, the Marxists? Because you have the Gravel Institute, and that does way better job of propaganda than the Breaker does. I
think the best thing to try and convince left-wing individuals into minarchism, libertarianism, and things like that is to use examples of successful co-ops fighting against large corporate powers. One example of this would be when people talk about the healthcare debate, right? Showing them examples of Christian co-ops that are progressive systems, right, where the wealthy pay more, the poor pay less, and they compete with pharmaceutical companies, often outcompeting them in their ability to provide healthcare to people. And so I think you can use things like this, that desire for activism, that desire for action, the desire for praxis, and try and use things like that, activism and co-ops and market solutions, to say, look, go out and touch some grass. You want to fight against the healthcare system. you and I both know the moment that the government gets control of healthcare, it's only going to benefit their super rich, wealthy friends. And you do the best you can to be like, look at what the Christian co-ops are doing. You guys should be doing the same thing. So I think if you can pull people into activism in market solutions and sell it under the ideas of market socialism, because they're co-op based systems competing with other entities, you can pull people away from the state's desire to gain power and function and giving that power over to the state, and instead chip away with market solutions that are based off of socialist praxis and belief systems. Then you don't actually have to change their ideology, and you don't have to change their belief system. You let them go out in activism in ways that are libertarian-minded solutions. That would be, off the top of my head, I think, probably better than trying to, let's say, sell Georgianism to, because Georgianism, while I don't disagree that it might be, the left might be susceptible to it, it is a radically different system than what we currently have, and I don't think they'll get behind it. You there? Uh-oh. Lil Room might be having some audio issues, so let's talk to chat for a second while we wait for him to come back. We have some people talking about the Jewish conspiracy stuff. That's interesting. They're patented. The patents need to be removed off of life-saving devices. Absolutely. I'm against IP laws. The fuck is subspecies? What do you think of subspecies theory about mankind? There are no races, rather subspecies, much like with dogs. Wowzers TV, I think you got to be really, really, really careful about using the word subspecies. In the American context, it's just a dumb insult. But under the European context, it is a very, very, very loaded term for Jews, because of Nietzschean philosophy of the Übermensch, right? The Superman. And then you have subhuman is that. So I'd be careful using that word. You might get banned a lot of places. Why do you not love me, Scott? Sorry. Sorry. Don't love you. I don't know you. I gotta go shovel. We get hit by 2 snorms. Be back in a while. Jesus. Well, then, you need the genetic difference, tribal or group gathering, and justification to separate by groups by more than just phenotypes, like color or head shape, in order to class them another species. Well, you also need, like, most biologists would agree that you need, like, an inability to breed. Like, there's, like, it's just a stupid argument. Like, humans are one species. Hey, welcome back.
Okay, I'm back.
Darwin and eugenics had nothing to do with how black people are treated in American culture today. Question mark. Doesn't really seem like a question. I do think that eugenics and specifically phrenology and things like that certainly played a role in the mistreatment of black people, because it gave a pseudoscientific kind of a pseudoscientific justification for ill and poor treatment of blacks in American culture and society, especially in the early 20th century. So I think to deny that that had an effect would be disingenuous.
Okay, I'm back. The internet crashed.
Oh yeah, are you on your phone right now?
Yes.
I can tell the difference in audio quality.
Okay, I could reconnect back to your computer right now.
Yeah. I can hang out with chat for just another minute, and then when I send you this, you can edit it out. Thank you. Remember, you said it, not me. What? Well, I said it. I don't feel like I said anything that was a hot take, to be honest with you. Let me scroll back up, see what I may have missed. Funny when you are doing the same for the same. I don't know. I'm overpowering the Libertarian Party without reprisal. Not even a primary issue, but oh, Jesus. Space Dawn Incorporated. Going ham in the chat. I love it. Gotta love active chatters. I accidentally moved you into the mod chat for a second.
Holy shit, the internet nice fucking sucks.
Oh well, you know.
Europe.
I'm in America, and I'm in a city, and I have gigabit internet, so I have no complaints here.
Yeah. So the other thing that I was concerned is that a lot of libertarians hate the neoclassical economics, right?
I'm sorry, you said neo-libertarian.
No.
What?
The libertarians don't like neoclassical economic. Is that true?
I mean, it depends on how you define neoclassical economics.
Because,
in reference, you mean in reference to Austrian economics? Like, what do you? Maybe you could give me a more, because it's very muddy here in America. Maybe.
Yes, because, for example, a lot of anarcho-capitalists especially said that neoclassical economy is garbage, but they are going to praise Thomas Sowell, who is
Neoclassical economics. Yeah, he's a Chicago boy.
Chicago boy, yeah. But then they going on the slander why they hate Milton Friedman. Why do anarcho-capitalists prefer Thomas Sowell over Milton Friedman? Because a lot of
I don't know. I have no idea, to be honest with you. I don't have a good answer for that. I like them both. I think they're both wrong on some things, but you know, I don't.
Yes, because I believe that a lot of anarcho-capitalists do themselves a disservice if they like discredit Chicago School of Economics.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's certainly debate within the ANCAP libertarian space about the legitimacy of empirical data and what it can and can't discover, right? I mean, because, you know, a strict Austrian economist perspective, you know, denies empirical data for being able to calculate because of the economic calculation problem, right? That being said, I think that's stupid. I think it's something to keep in the back of your mind, even as a neoclassical economist, right? I think it is important to recognize that you can't determine value. You can determine trends. You can determine how policy and external stimuli affect the price-demand equation. You know, and I think that's perfectly legitimate and fine. I would say I'm probably closer to a neoclassical economist in terms of my perspective than Austrian. But also I think there's very little difference between the two anyways. As opposed to like a Keynesian or a post-Keynesian, you know, kind of economic theory where you can see them cooking the books and you can see them, you know, changing the way that they do economic studies. One of the, you know, I think Paul Krugman is probably one of the worst examples of this. He's a piece of shit and a liar, and he's a Nobel laureate for horrible economic data, where he cooked the way he did his research massively so that he could attempt to justify a belief that is absurd on its face, which is that increases in minimum wage have no effect whatsoever on unemployment. And when you look at the way that he did his studies, it's trash economics. And I think the Austrian looks at it and says, oh, well, he's trying to prove something you can't prove. And the neoclassical says, no, he's doing, you know, oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. Somebody's mad. Hold on, I got to deal with something in chat real quick.
Okay.
1 second, just because I got to make sure that it doesn't. There we go. Sorry. Somebody coming in with the hot takes that all ANCAPs are pedos and my children should be taken by. I'm just like, hold on, let me time that out real quick so it so it gets rid of the messages and I don't have to deal with it.
Okay, so what kind of thing? By the way, what kind of thinking got you into anarcho-capitalism specifically? What kind of thinker did influence you the most?
I mean, honestly, it wasn't any one theorist. I would say the final nail in the coffin was Chaos Theory by Robert Murphy. But mostly it just came from my streaming co-host was an ANCAP, and he'd been trying to sell me on ANCAP for a long time, and I was a minarchist. And then I had to defend anarcho-capitalist philosophy because I was going out in spaces where people would trash him, but I would be out there as a minarchist. And so like I would be like, hold on, well, let's steel man it. I kind of agree with you to some extent, but let me steel man it. And in arguing from that perspective for so long made me realize that a lot of the that by being a minarchist was really just me not being creative enough to understand how anarcho-capitalism could work. And once I realized that it could legitimately work and that there were answers to a lot of these questions, there was just no reason for me to be a minarchist, because the only way I think you can be a minarchist and not an anarcho-capitalist is if you believe that it pragmatically can't work. Because if you believe that it pragmatically can work, right, then what you are saying is that you lack morals. You're saying that you're an evil person, because you're saying that you're lying, saying that you believe in things like freedom and liberty and freedom of association, freedom of movement, all of these things, unless you think that the best way that those things are protected is with a minimalized state. If you believe that it is possible for anarcho-capitalism and anarchism to function, and you call yourself a minarchist, then what you are is you are a consequentialist that doesn't want to do it because it would be hard, and you simply don't believe in those things. And you're lying if you say that you do.
Okay, so now I can question some. I can answer some questions if you have about my system and how it would work, because most of the stream was me asking you questions.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm not sure. What like when you say my system, what is it that you're specifically advocating for under minarchism?
Okay, so what I advocate under minarchism is to reduce the state only to be like a service.
Mm-hmm.
If between if the individuals cannot deal with it on their own, when it comes to like a law, where I was saying that, for example, let's say somebody murdered someone. So I believe that this the only way of the state to intervene, or if there was some like a huge flood or some shit. That's why that's the reason why I want to keep emergency services such as firefighters and maybe ambulances and such. That why and that those are things that are good to be owned by state when the shit hits the fan. I don't believe in the state healthcare as a good idea. I don't believe in a state education as a good idea. I think the individuals can decide it on their own. But I like you said, from pragmatic point of view, I don't believe the anarcho-capitalist society can work from purely, and I believe that people are not are ultimately in their way evil. But I also do realize that the government can be evil. But if there is a very strong constitution and super limited government agenda, I think that my system could be a good compromise.
Yeah, my biggest question to the minarchist, right, is always how do you envision keeping a minarchist system from growing? Because that seems, at least from my perspective, that seems to be kind of the historical process. And I think especially like, you know, ANCAP 101, you read Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of a State, and you kind of get this ideological belief that we have, which is, you know, that the judicial system presents an interesting problem for the minarchist state.
Yes.
Because it seems to, I'm trying to straw man you as much as possible via my question, but adding context as well. It seems that when minarchist states establish themselves, the judicial ultimately either is set up in such a way that by regarding the constitutionality of things seems to slowly but surely increase the abuses of the state and the legitimacy of states to gain and function in power. How do you stop that?
Okay, so how would I stop that? I personally don't know, but I believe that one of the things that hurt the American state in the long run is the populism. I believe that some level of the government should be technocratic in regards that, for example, let's say there is a populist that say, hey, you guys, I want to get you your free stuff, so they will ultimately get in the government and spend as much money as possible. So I believe that the top level of the government should be technocratic. For example, that the
sorry, hold on, you're starting to talk fast. I'm sorry, what were you saying? The top part of the government should be what?
Technocratic. For example, that the budget should be strictly decided by economists, for example. And I know that economists can be flawed people too. But if we keep let's say, the populist element out of the most important branches of the government, I believe my system could work. I don't mind if, for example, on a small level, there is a democracy. For example, if you vote the mayor, it won't affect the people of the nation. Nationwide, it will only, everybody will just point at the town and say that the town fucking sucks. So I believe that a little bit of technocracy can prevent the state from going bonkers as fast.
Yeah. So, how do you? So you say you want a technocracy? At least
Technocracy to some level.
To some level, right? Yeah. I'm not trying to strawman you. The issue that I see with that is that sciences are designed to tell us what could possibly happen, not what one ought to do, right?
Yes.
So it seems like you want a certain level of the government to unironically be designed to derive an ought from an is. And I don't understand how that works. And so maybe you could expound upon that, because like you don't want economists writing economic policy.
Nah, I don't want that. I, for example, think that there should be some part of government that decides the budget for the military, for the police, for the emergency service. And that should be strictly run by economists. Because, for example, there is a minister of finance in my country that is not, well, there was a minister of finance that did not have any sort of economic education. And
Right.
it was detrimental to super high inflation. So I believe that those people who are in those top government posts, for example, when they decide about defense.
But we already have that. I don't understand, right? Like I mean, we have, for example, in America, we have an executive branch, right? We have a legislative branch that determines what things should be done. They write it into law, right? And it's up to the executive to enforce those things, right? And so you have someone, let's say, obviously there are some political appointees at the very top of the cabinet that are not necessarily experts in their field.
Yes.
But the bureaucracy, the kind of the deep state, the fourth branch of government, is full of technical experts. And that in and of itself is part of the problem of the state, I would say, is that the bureaucracy is full of individuals that do, you know what I mean? That are very easily shifted by bias. Like, I don't understand how that's an improvement upon the system. And I don't want to attack you. I want to better understand where you're coming from, because it seems like what you're describing is the deep state, but made as a top level of the state. I'm confused.
Okay, so there would be a strong ban in the constitution to ever expand the government. Personally, like you said, there is an innovate. It's not actually preventable to prevent state from growing.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can at least live in a short time where we can live in something that resembles the true freedom, it can be worth it. And I think that, and I will sound like typical conservatives, with the right people on the right post, we can actually make that work. So if we actually have a strong constitution, that would be very, very, very hard to change, unless there would be like a military coup or something.
Mm-hmm. Or,
for example,
but you just admitted, and I don't want to attack you, but you just said the eventual conclusion of this is the growth of the state into what we already have as an issue today.
Yes, I meant it from if we would put it as a now, now. But I believe that if we can, like, in the legislation and in like the law and in like constitution, if we could rewrite the constitution to an ideal state, let's say, and make the constitution super hard to like edit that, like change that stuff into that, I think that it could be preventable for growing.
Okay, I'm gonna need like a detailed example of what you mean, because and I'm not trying to be a dick. It just seems like you're saying, well, with the right people or with the right checks and balances, this will be okay. And I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna need you to tell me what's going on, because it just doesn't seem plausible.
Let's just say that, for example, there would be somebody in the government who say we need to expand in that department, right? I want a new government department. So the person would automatically be fired from the government, because that would be unconstitutional. there would be I would like to have like an I would actually have government to fire the people who basically.
So what happens when the government doesn't fire them? Do we revolt?
Yes.
Okay.
People have a right to revolt against the state.
Okay. So, but under your system, the state would have a military.
Yes, the state would have a military, but the military would be strongly limited because it simply would not. Because the growing military required more money, which would mean higher taxes on inflation, and because my system does not have a central bank.
Mm-hmm.
Because I actually subscribe to Rothbardian theory on the currency.
So how does the state fund itself?
Through private currency, the way that Hayek proposed it. Because Hayek actually, despite him being quite more for larger state agenda than I am, because he was proposing healthcare and education and such, he actually wanted a private currency in his system of free banking.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's me, right, I'm just never going to engage in that currency, right? Like,
Okay.
I mean, I would advocate the dissolution of the state, and it seems like what happens when people just choose not to use that currency? What happens when we choose to suck the vampire dry, if you will, and just not use their currency?
You could use any other currency from any other individual. Because
Right, but I mean, like, how does the state maintain itself if the people choose? Because I mean, there's obviously a cost here, right? I would imagine that the private currency would be more expensive than other forms of currency because it's a voluntary system of funding the state, right?
I would not say it's voluntary because there would be a flat tax that would have to be paid in some form of currency. In some,
Okay. So what you're really saying is it will fund itself through forcible taxation.
Forcible taxation. I did not say anything about voluntary taxation because that system simply cannot work because who would pay taxes if they would be voluntary?
Okay.
That's my fault actually.
Okay. So, but again, how do we keep them from raising the taxes?
How do we keep them from raising the taxes? I actually plan for the government to every, let's say, 5 years to become smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And actually becomes smaller, and only in state of war will become large. And after the state of
so the government will reduce itself via your constitution, but in a state of war, which we know, thanks for 2 bits. In a state of war, it can all of a sudden increase its powers and gain emergency war powers. I don't know, man. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a recipe for disaster to me. Sounds like a state that is directly incentivized to maintain its own power and wealth to go to war as a means of instituting emergency war powers. Sounds like a state that will be perpetually at war because the incentive structure is designed that way.
Okay, I probably explained it badly. I said that only like justifiable expansion of a government would be under the war. I don't say it would be constitutional, but it would be logical to, for example, expand the government under the war, for example, if they wanted to draft people to military.
Okay, I think we should get away from specific questions about how your system would work because it seems like you believe in minarchism, but maybe, and you have some ideas, but it doesn't seem like it's fair for me to critique a constitution you haven't written.
Okay, that's true.
Right, because like I can find holes in it pretty easily, but that's not because the system is flawed. It's because it's not a well thought out, drafted, written thing by you.
Yes. I actually never thought about making the law legislation because I'm not a lawyer or judge.
So right. So I want to get away from that because I feel like it's unfair to come at you that way.
Yes.
That being said, I would definitely talk to Wellspring in my community. He is someone who is writing and is about 85% complete on an incredibly exhaustive and incredibly intelligent libertarian constitution. It is objectivist, but it is very well done.
Okay.
And he might be able to give you some great ideas on that regard. That being said, what is it that keeps you so from an ethics position, do you believe that you believe that you have different ethics or ethical issues with anarcho-capitalists and volunteerists and anarchists?
Yes, yeah.
Like is this a philosophical distinction, or is this purely a pragmatic one where you just don't believe that it will work, and so you feel like you have the same moral framework as us, but the difference is you don't think it's possible?
So actually, I think from, like you mentioned, the pragmatic point of view, and also I think that people simply cannot be changed, and that some people will ultimately be evil. So I think that the limited government to keep those bastards out of society could in some way work. I'm not as like I said, I cannot, for example, make law. That's the reason why I did not make a constitution, because I don't understand how this shit should be written.
Yeah, I would say the some people are evil. I think we would I think we both agree on that, right? I don't think you can educate evil out of society. I worry that those evil people become successful and become part of the state apparatus, right? What I worry about is evil people having more power over me, and so I want to reduce that power to the best way that I think possible.
Okay, I actually think that from the pragmatic standpoint, it's simply just not viable. More, and there are, for example, some ethical differences that I cannot explain with words. That are hard for me to explain, but are probably on more ethical level than on pragmatic level. So,
are you just saying because of the language? I'm confused.
No, because I cannot simply put it in words, because I have a problem to describe some concepts with words. It's simply problematic.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Sorry. So you believe that? So what is? Give me some of your big points of contention with why you. Like, what are the major reasons that you stop at minarchism? Like, you say it's not pragmatic. What is it that you believe is not pragmatic?
I don't know the whole thing about the. I don't know. I always fear that simply the law at some area I think should be consistent in the whole of the area, and I don't actually think that the covenant communities that you proposed. I personally think they would simply evolve into the state, into the minimalist state that is simply just inevitable. At least in my opinion. I'm not a sociologist. That's just how I think it would simply turn out.
Well, I mean, if it is via here's my question: would you have? Let me do hypotheticals. I know how much people on the internet both love and hate hypotheticals, but let me give you one, right? So let's say a covenant community. Let's say a corporation establishes covenant communities, right? And they have what you might consider to be a minarchist government. I won't say state because it's a contract that you sign as an individual, a voluntary contract that you sign that has many of the functions that you might regard as a minimalist situation. And let's say they take over a large area because other places say, you know what, this system is a lot better. I'm going to voluntarily choose to be part of this system. And other communities spring up and they become part of this system. And it takes over a large area, landmass of land, or a large amount of population. Let's say it takes over 2 million people, right? What is your point of contention there between what we believe and what you like? Why is that an issue to you? Like how large does it need to be? Because what you said is, well, I think everyone kind of needs to be under the same rule set, right? In order for it to just practically function. And what I'm saying is, okay, well, why does it have to be a nation? Like, we already have that in the system of nation states. Every nation state has different laws, different rules, different political philosophies, different forms of taxation, right? And so how big does the state need to be, or the size of landmass and the population included need to be before it is acceptable to you that anarcho-capitalism is acceptable under this system of a voluntary thing? Or is it the idea that a contract needs to be signed and that people can refuse to use, like what, where's the point of contention in that system? Or let's say it takes over a size of landmass and a population that says, let's say half of Germany.
Okay.
Did your internet go out, or are you just thinking?
I'm just thinking.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah.
So the thing about Minarchism and me is just the thing that I know that I talk about law a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I believe that is, I don't know, I'm super skeptical. I know that it can be some evidences and such, and some concepts that I, for example, have not read about too much. But I do believe that I don't know. I don't think that people are intelligent enough to accept the voluntary law and to everybody to abide it. I think that law should be enforced by the state entity, and to keep this keep the law enforcement by the state entity or government should be through taxation. But the taxation should be low as possible.
I'm gonna debate bro you just a little bit, okay?
Okay.
So, do you believe that we should invade Iran?
No.
Let's say it would be of no cost to us to do such. Let's say we developed technology that could just instantly vaporize all of their weapons technology. Push that button and then just invade and forcibly make them a democracy.
No.
Okay.
No.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Because why would I? I have no fucking reason to invade Iraq.
Why?
Because those people did not do any harm to me.
Okay. So, why would it matter if you lived under an anarcho-capitalist system and you lived in a covenant community that was very large? Why would it matter if one of your neighbors that wasn't in the covenant community, right, lived under a different system?
I don't know.
I guess what I'm asking is, if you want minarchism, why couldn't you have anarcho-capitalism and live in a large covenant community that was voluntarily designed, that had a minarchist system? If you believe that that's the most efficient way for people to have their rights, wouldn't people choose to live in that situation? And if they lived outside of that situation, why do you care? You're not the type of person that wants to go around liberating people.
No. I meant about, for example, when we live in the same place, under the same community. That I don't know, can a person, for example, my neighbor, say that he doesn't want to abide by the community law?
No. The idea of a covenant community, is that everyone in that community signs a contract when they purchase property in that community, right? So essentially to become a citizen. So the moment they purchase property, or the moment they go there is a minarchist government that is set up much the way that you might like it, right? And says, we have a monopoly on power and violence, right? The difference is that unlike in a government today where you don't sign a contract and you don't have a right to it, you're simply granted citizenship, usually upon the age of 18, and you just live there, and your only choice is to move to another country, right? The difference is you live in this covenant community. Everybody signs a contract. Everybody agrees to these rules. Everybody agrees to, let's say, even a democratic process, right? That's the idea of a covenant community under anarcho-capitalism, is that we're under anarchism, is that we believe that they have the right to establish their own government. So long as they don't violate freedom of movement, freedom of association, and things like that. And so long as, and they can choose to not associate or not trade with whomever they want. So you would have your minarchist government. It would just be under a form of anarchism.
Okay. So I believe that basically, I don't know, the whole thing about anarcho-capitalism is that it just basically becomes a state again that will simply be abolished, and we rinse and repeat. That's just my perspective, because in my mind, the government equals the state, no matter how voluntary it is.
Okay. But do you not recognize the distinction then between what it is that I advocate for and what it is that you advocate for?
From some point of view, I do. By the way, I will have to end in like 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But remember when we had talked, you were like, well, what's the difference? And I explained my distinction between a government and a state. right? One being voluntary and one being involuntary.
Yes,
So
basically, I believe that what you are proposing is the people will voluntarily live there, but I believe that in some time it becomes involuntary. Because, for example, I don't know, the landowner, the owner of the community, will probably, I don't know, let's say he would just close the borders and force everybody to live under their rule, under the dictatorship rule. So it would.
Right, but that's the same argument that you made for minarchism, right? You said eventually minarchism will grow. So it seems like what you're arguing for, right, is the exact same thing I'm arguing for, but you're calling it a different name. And the only difference is that you argue that the entirety of the nation state become minarchist via force, and you're just skipping to that next step. And what I'm arguing for is that everyone live under anarchism as they so choose. And you're saying, you know, that you're saying that by that by virtue of, oh, thanks for the host, Demon Machine. I really appreciate it. 93 viewers. We're wrapping up a discussion with Lil Room, who is a small YouTuber, minarchist in Europe, and here is his YouTube channel if you want to check it out. Yeah, and he is we're just kind of having a discussion between differences and ways that we can, you know, coincide, and et cetera, and under minarchism. But soon we'll be going into news and reaction and stuff like that. But yeah, so I think that honestly, like, I'm not so sure that you or I as different as you think in this regard, right? You see what I'm saying? Because I would argue that by virtue of the fact that you believe that anarchism will eventually create the state, so you kind of just want to skip to that process. And I'm simply saying, why not try it out and see what happens? Maybe you think there will be some violence or some starvation along the way, and you think
not starvation. I bet I will think that will be a fuck ton load of violence and warlords and such. So I don't think it's
right. But I'm not advocating that we just do it tomorrow, right? I'm advocating for the slow eventual process to minarchism.
Sure. I know, but still.
Well, I disagree. But you know what? I think that is as good a place as any. If you didn't have any final questions, I will post my YouTube video in general in Discord, so that you could check it out. Maybe the defending self. I don't care if you do a reaction to it or you want to fucking, you know, put it on your channel and be like, here's why I think this video is wrong. Like, do whatever it is that you want to do. You know what I mean? I figure I'll just give it to you. And
okay, thank you.
And let me just copy this real quick, and then at, oh my god, how the hell am I supposed to get your name? AL.
Okay, that was actually a very educational debate. I'm sorry if I was like strawmanning, because
no. I mean, look, you know, I don't think you were attempting to strawman. There's a difference between strawmanning intentionally and unintentionally, right? And I think when you strawman someone unintentionally, you're in a position where you're trying to create something so that you can defeat it. You're asking questions, right?
Yes.
And that's just coming from a place of wanting to understand. So I wouldn't accuse you of strawmanning.
Yes, there will be probably more questions that I would ask, but I gotta go for now.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much for having. The YouTube link is in the channel. Definitely check it out. Lil Room will tell you all about how Georgism is based if you're a lefty.
Nah. I just think it's best way to convert lefty. So I would actually make a video about it.
You should make a video on that. I would love to see that. We're gonna hold your feet to the fire, because now there's gonna be some viewers and some subscribers, hopefully, that can demand that you make that video. But it was so awesome having you.
By the way, I'm for flat text, not land value text. Just if somebody was thinking that I'm a land start.
Unprogressive text. How dare you, sir? How dare you? Well, thank you so much. I will. I'm marking the audio right now, and I will. I'll get you the stream, and get you the video after I'm done streaming.
Thank you so much.
All right. You have a good night.
Good night.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.